Hello guys. So in this lecture, I'm going to show you how to write the basic crowd sale application with just a constructor and a contribute function. Then in the upcoming lectures, we will start improvising this smart contract or the crowd sale application and keep adding the multiple features. Right. So let's start with the basic constructor part. So before actually initializing the constructor, we need to define certain state variables which will define the state of the crowd sale, right? Whether it's fundraising failed, successful, how much balance we have, who are the contributors, and to how much amount we have raised, and what is the deadline, whether we have completed or not completed, how much we have raised recently. All these kind of state variables that we need to define. So let me just start writing the sum of the state variables, and then we will come to the constructor, and then we'll close this lecture so that we can come to the next class and then continue the extending this crowd sale. So remember what we are doing. I want to just revise everything again, that we are building an application in which we will raise the funding through the public in the some cryptocurrencies like ethers, and then in exchange of their investment we will issue them some crypto token or a virtual token. People also call it a virtual currency. So you don't have to call it a virtual currency here, but you can call it a virtual token. So we'll issue the virtual token against the investment that person has made into the crowd sale to track the investment and further issue the real asset when required. So first and the most important state variable is the state. What is the state of the crowd sale? So we will define the enumerator over here using this command. So we'll type enum, then we'll type we'll call it a state, right? And inside the state, we will have the multiple states. We'll call it a fund raising first, and then failed, then successful, and then closed. Remember, let's revise this. Fundraising is the first initial state. Failed is when the funding has failed to achieve the minimum target. Successful is when the funding has successfully completed but not yet transferred the fund to the founders. Closed is when everything is done, no need to do anything, and this contract purpose of this crowd sale is over. Okay, so this is simply the state variable. Next is simply we need to initialize the what is the current state. So of course this is the enumerator which will have the 0, 1, 2 and 3. Total 4 values starting with 0, 1, 2 and 3. But we need to create a variable for that as well so that we can track the information. So we'll call it a public variable and we'll call it a small state or a state with the small s, and we'll initialize the value as dot fundraising. So this will be the default state, right? Next is we need to track the contribution. So we need to define a struct or the structure, data structure with the name contribution, right? The contribution will have the two things. One is the amount, how much amount person has invested. Let's say amount in ether, and then address, who has contributed, right? So we call it a contributor, right? So this is the person. This is just a structure to track this. Next is, since we will be having a multiple contributors, we will be actually creating an array. So let's call it a contribution. So the contribution, and let's call it a simple contributions. So contributions is an array which will hold the structures inside it. So when we say contributions 0, contributions 1, contributions 3, something like this, contributions 0, this will become the first contributor, this one V, then 1, then 2 and then 3, something like that, right? And this will contain the amount and the who actually contributed. Okay, so we have the contributions. Next is a simple variable. Let's start writing some of the state variable. The first is the public variable defining the how much amount we have raised, total raised. Next is again the public variable which will contain the current balance. Remember, the current balance can be even lesser than the fund raised, because we in future, let's say if we want people to withdraw the fund as well, so that is also possible, but we are not doing going to implement this feature here, but still it is a useful thing. Next is we'll create the public variable which will have the deadline or the timestamp. So up to this much time the people will be able to contribute. Next is the again a public variable which will have the completed at. So at what time the funding has been completed at. Next is the price of the token. Suppose we want our gadget to be worth 5 ether per token, or we can want just 1 ether per token. So let's just for the simplicity, because as of today the 1 ether is worth around $43. So let's call it a price in V. Right, V is the smallest unit of the ether. So it is followed, it is 1 followed by 18th 0, 18 0, remember. Next is that we need to also keep the track of the minimum target or the funding minimum target. So let's call it a funding minimum target in V. So this is the minimum target the funding has to achieve to make it successful. Next is the funding maximum target. Suppose we want to also put a cap on the maximum target. Funding maximum target V, right? And then we also want to create a token reward. Suppose if you want to issue the reward, so we need to actually, so let me explain you it separately, because how we will be defining the contract first. So next is we need to also create the who is the creator. So this will be the address of the creator. Remember, all the addresses are similar. So every smart contract or the account or the wallet address is just an address. So we'll call it a creator. So this will be the person who created this crowd sale. And then we will have the beneficiary. Remember, the beneficiary can be different than the creator, right? And when beneficiary can be the DAO, as I have told you earlier, it can be a decentralized autonomous organization. So I'm just saying again that if you wanted to understand the DAO, check out my other course where I have explained everything about DAO, how the DAO is being built, how it can work, how they function exactly, and everything about the DAO. So you'll definitely enjoy that course as well. So next, the beneficiary, then we will have the simple string which will have the campaign URL, which will be again public. You can call it a campaign URL. Next is the byte which will define the version number. Let's call it a constant. Let's declare it as a constant. So it will be version is equal to 1, right? And then we can have the certain events. So we can define as many events as we want, but let me just write few events over here. So let's create event log funding received, right? In that we will have the address who invested, the address, the uint, the amount, how much amount he has invested, and the current total, sorry. And let's define another event which will have whether the beneficiary has paid or not. Let's call it a winner paid. So it will be just an address of the winner. And the next event will be whether the funding is successful or not. So whenever the funding is successful, we will announce it through an event funding, and we'll specify the how much amount we have raised. Then we will have the funder initialized, or you can call it a crowd sale initialized. and we will have a different variable, address of the creator, then address of the beneficiary, then string with the URL, and then uint as, I'm calling it a funding maximum target. You can specify as many variables as you want. Let's call it target in ether, and then uint 256 as deadline. That's it. These are the events, and then we also want some modifiers, but we'll come to the modifier once we actually specify the other functions and the contribute kind of functions, because we don't want people to contribute if the state is not the fundraising or the state is failed. So we can create such modifier which will make sure that nobody transfer the investment into the crowd sale if we are not fundraising, if the state of the smart contract is not fundraising, right, it's successful or failed or closed, we don't want people to contribute.